I still remember the part nobody wants to hear first. Not the craft, not the missing time, not the room with the screens. The first thing I remember is my aunt's hand on the steering wheel, locked so tight her knuckles looked pale in the glow from the dashboard, while the whole world outside the car seemed to hold its breath. I was little, 6 or 7, young enough that I still thought ice cream after dinner was a whole adventure. Young enough that the sky outside a car window could keep me busy for miles. We were outside Boston, coming back over a small bridge after dinner, and I had my face turned up toward the stars. The car was moving normally. The city was behind us. The night had that cold blue shine it gets near water, where every headlight looks sharper than it should. Then a piece of the sky went missing. It did not streak in. It did not flash. It did not arrive like a plane or a helicopter. It was just there, a black silent rectangle sliding across the stars, so low and flat that for a second, my child brain tried to file it under roof, sign, bridge, anything ordinary. But it kept moving with us. Then it lowered until it was directly above the car. No lights, no engine, no wind. Just this dead black shape close enough that I thought I might be able to touch it. And because I was a child, because fear had not caught up to me yet, I started crawling toward the window. I wanted to reach up. I wanted to put my hand on the impossible thing that had covered the stars. My aunt snapped. She grabbed my shirt and pulled me back inside the car, yelling at me to stop, to get down, to not lean out. She thought I was being reckless. Then she looked where I was looking. That was the exact second everything changed. The car should have kept rolling. It did not. I remember the sense of motion leaving before I understood that motion had left. The tires were on the road. The dashboard was still glowing. The bridge was still there. But the car felt like it had been pinned in place. My aunt panicked. I mean, real panic. Not anger anymore. Not adult frustration. She saw what was above us. And whatever she saw in that black shape broke the normal rules she had been using 5 seconds earlier. Her mouth was open. Her hands were locked. Her eyes were wide in a way I had never seen on her face. Then she froze, not like someone too scared to move. Her hands stayed fixed on the wheel. Her shoulders stayed lifted. The horror stayed on her face, like somebody had pressed a button on the world and stopped her on one frame. I nudged her. I said her name. I looked past her, out through the windshield and the side window, and that was when the wrongness opened all the way up. There were no cars passing, no horns, no engine noise, no city wash. It was as if the road, the bridge, the traffic, my aunt, and everything around us had been taken out of time. But I had been left awake by mistake. The craft above us did not need to make a sound. The silence was worse. I kept looking from the black rectangle to my aunt's frozen face, waiting for one of them to explain itself. Neither did. The next part is gone. There is no clean memory of being lifted. No beam, no hallway between the car and the place I woke up. No feeling of my body leaving the seat. One moment I was inside a stopped car under a black object. The next moment, I was somewhere else. I came back to myself in a dark hall. That is the simplest way to say it, but simple does not make it small. The room was huge. The ceiling was high enough that I remember my eyes going up and not finding the top right away. The walls looked metallic. Not like a school hallway, not like a hospital, not like anything I had ever been inside. It had that cold, industrial feeling, but it was too clean and too vast to be a factory. And I was not alone. There were children everywhere. Not a few, not a classroom, a crowd. Rows and clusters of kids around my age, all standing in that enormous dark space. Like we had been gathered for something we did not understand yet. I remember the scale before I remember fear. the sense that this was not happening to just me. Around us were tall figures in pale robes and hoods. I do not want to make them sound like monsters, because that is not how I felt them at first. They were watchers. Guides, maybe? Guardians, maybe. They stood around the children, waiting, keeping the group calm. Almost like adults keeping a line together before a field trip. But they were not human adults. They were too tall, too thin, too still. They told us, not with normal speech exactly, to stay calm, to be patient. Our turn would come. That phrase stayed with me in a way the missing part did not. Our turn would come. The doors in front of us were massive. I remember them as more than doors. They were a boundary. On our side was the dark hall and all those waiting children. On the other side was whatever the whole night had been for. Then the doors opened. The room beyond them was brighter, larger, and impossible in a different way. We were moved forward. I remember entering with the others and seeing that the new room had levels. Not floors like a mall or balconies in a theater, but layers built into the space itself. I could look across and down and see more children on other levels, each one with one of those tall, hooded beings nearby. The room felt organized. That is what made it worse later. This was not chaos. Nobody seemed surprised except us. One tall figure gestured for me to come closer. It wanted me to follow, but I was a curious kid, and the size of the place pulled me away. I went toward a railing instead. I wanted to see how far down it went. I wanted to understand the room before I understood why I was there. Below me were more levels, more children, more pale robes, more movement that felt practiced and quiet. When I turned back, the being was still waiting. It gestured again, patient in a way that did not feel human. That is when I saw the screens. They were not screens the way I knew screens. They rose from floor to ceiling, covering the walls. Huge, transparent-looking surfaces with moving images inside them. Behind the images, or maybe within them, I could see stars. The whole wall was alive with pictures. I went closer. The tall being stood beside me. It wore the hood low, but I could see enough. It was pale, very tall, maybe 7 feet. The eyes were too large. Blue, or at least that is how my mind kept them. There may have been a little light hair showing near the robe, but memory can soften things. It can make the unbearable almost human after the fact. At the time, I thought of angels. I had been around Catholic ideas. I was little. I reached for the only file I had. But standing there, with that huge hand reaching for mine, I knew the file did not fit. The being guided me to the wall of screens. It did not move its mouth. I do not remember sound in the normal way. The communication came straight into thought, as natural and unnatural as a dream, where you understand someone without hearing them. The first images were not frightening. They were beautiful. I saw people. Not just people like us now, but people from before. Early humans, ancient cities before they were ruins, structures being raised, roads, markets, art, music, buildings, tools, lights, crowds, machines. The story kept moving forward in pictures, like someone had recorded us from the beginning and stored everything we had ever made. It felt like being shown a family album for the whole species. The being was proud of us. That is the only word I have that comes close. Proud, pleased, impressed. It wanted me to understand that we had created things. We had made beauty out of nothing. We had learned to build, sing, paint, count, travel, and remember. It showed me civilization not as a lecture, but as evidence that we could become more than animals afraid in the dark. I was not scared then. I was small, and the room was impossibly large, and the being beside me was not human. but the feeling coming from it was gentle. Then the images changed. The wall filled with explosions. Mushroom clouds. I knew what nuclear weapons were in the flat way. A child knew them then. Duck under the desk. Do not look at the flash. The adults were afraid of something out there, and we were supposed to practice hiding from it under furniture. But the screens did not show it like a school drill. They showed what it did. They showed fire climbing into the sky. They showed the land burned and broken. They showed air that no one should breathe, water no one should drink, animals dying, trees gone wrong. The planet hurt in ways I did not have adult language for yet. The being's sadness was heavier than fear. It was not angry the way humans get angry. It was disappointed in a deep, old way. I asked what I was seeing, not out loud. I thought the question, and the answer came back into me. These were also things we had created. That was the part that landed wrong. The cities, the art, the music, the bridges, the stories, the medicines. The being wanted me to understand that the danger was not just that we had weapons. It was that we had made tools powerful enough to damage everything else that lived here with us. Not just people, animals, trees, water, soil, air, the small living things nobody thinks about until they are gone. It showed me the planet as something watched and loved, or at least valued by minds that were not ours. I do not know if that makes them kind. I do not know if concern is the same as goodness. I only know that in that room, as a child, I felt that the earth mattered to them, and we were being warned, not threatened. There is a difference. A threat says, "Do this, or I will hurt you." A warning says, "Keep doing this, and you will hurt yourself." That was the feeling. The children mattered too. I could not understand why all of us were there, why the room was full of kids from my generation, why adults were not standing where we stood. But even then, some part of me understood that the message was being placed in young minds on purpose. Maybe because we would grow into the world that made the decision. Maybe because children remember symbols before they remember arguments. Maybe because, whatever they were, they had decided adults were already too hardened around their own excuses. I do not claim to know. I only know what I remember seeing. The return was as abrupt as the taking. One moment I was in that vast room with the screens and the tall being beside me. The next moment I was back in the car. My aunt came out of whatever had held her. She did not ease back. She snapped back into herself terrified, as if no time had passed for her at all, or as if all the terror she had been frozen inside had been waiting behind her eyes. The craft was gone. The road was there again. The car worked again. The world had restarted. She started driving and would not talk to me. Not really. I tried, because I was a child, because I needed the adult in the car to explain what had just happened. But she would not enter the conversation. She took me straight home. No ice cream, no detour, no attempt to pretend the night was normal in a comforting way. Just silence. When we got back, her sister asked where we had been. Hours had passed. That is one of the details that still keeps the whole memory from floating away into dream territory for me. Someone else noticed the absence. The night outside us had kept counting. Even if the road under our car had stopped, my aunt refused to talk about it. Not that night, not later. If I tried to bring it up, she would get upset. Not curious. Not doubtful. Upset. There are people who hear a story like this and think the scariest part must be the beings or the craft. For me, one of the scariest parts was watching an adult decide never to open a door in her own memory, because that meant she knew there was a door. I wish I could tell you the memory stayed clean. It did not. The older I got, the more I understood that memory is not a hard drive. It is not a court transcript. It is a living thing, and living things change shape around pain. Some parts stayed bright. The black rectangle blotting out the stars, my hand reaching toward the window, my aunt's frozen face, the metal hall, the children, the huge doors, the layers in the room, the eyes under the hood, the screens full of us, the bombs, the sadness. Other parts stayed missing. How I left the car, how I entered the hall, how many children were there, how long the being stood beside me, whether the hand that reached for mine was warm or cold. I have drawn pieces of it over the years, because drawing is the only way I know to keep a memory from being eaten by language. Words make you choose. A picture lets the wrongness stay wrong. I have wondered if anyone else remembers that room. That is the part that still pulls at me. The crowd was too large for this to be only mine, if the memory is what it presents itself to be. There were so many of us. Kids from the late 80s. Kids old enough to see the screens and young enough to carry the message forward without knowing how. Sometimes I think the room was a warning. Sometimes I think it was a lesson. Sometimes I think it was a test. And nobody told us the rules, but I do not think it was random. I am not telling this because I think I can prove it to you. I cannot hand you a photograph of the craft over the car. I cannot produce a list of the other children. I cannot make my aunt sit down and describe what she saw. I cannot rewind the missing hours and bring back the part where I went from the road to the hall. All I have is the memory, the shape it left in me, and the ordinary facts that refuse to sit comfortably around it. We left for ice cream. We came back without it. Hours were gone. My aunt would not speak, and I grew up with a memory of a place no child should have been able to invent from nothing. A black craft close enough to touch, a frozen car, a hall full of children, robed figures and screens that seemed to hold the whole history of humanity, like a warning someone had been saving for us. If you hear this as a dream, I understand. If you hear it as a screen memory, I understand. If you hear it as a child's mind trying to survive a moment that had no normal category, I understand that too. I return to the bridge. I return to the dashboard light. I return to the silent shape above the roof. And I return to my aunt's hands fixed on the wheel, while the world outside the car waits for something unseen to press play.